Howdy folks, today we're going to find out what makes a great portrait with one of the best in the business. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. We've spent literally hundreds of hours interviewing some of the most renowned photographers of our time. In fact, it was 209,233 seconds in 2023 alone. And if you want to know how many hours that is, no idea. Get a calculator. But it's definitely a lot of hours. Hell yeah, it is. As always, I'm your host, Kirsten Nuts. And before we get into it, I've got one thing to ask of you. I've noticed that over 65% of our viewers on YouTube and listeners on audio are not subscribed to this channel. And you can really help us out by hitting that subscribe button. It'll help us get even more amazing guests on the show. It's just one click away. It'll take a mere second. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, let's give it up for today's special guest, all the way from the home of bourbons, sluggers, and apparently kills, Louisville, Kentucky. Give it up for Boudoir portrait and headshot photographer extraordinaire, Ben MARCUM. Ben, how are you, man?
I'm very well, thank you. And I may be one of the only kilt wearers in Louisville, Kentucky, but you
know. Do you have Scottish, Scottish like heritage, or do you just like it?
Somewhere in the family line? You know, I did the DNA tests, and there's like you're, point whatever percent Scottish. It really started for me because I don't like wearing shorts, and I got hot. And then once I started wearing them, I was like, oh man, these are like the most comfortable things on the planet. And now I can't go back to pants.
And I mean, it does get hot where you are in your part of the world. I guess it's the summer at least.
Yeah, the summers can be brutal. It's hot, it's humid. I try to avoid going outside at every single cost.
Well, I think the UK might be the perfect climate for you then, because over here hot doesn't really happen. The funny thing though over here in the UK is that I think people get the words hot and sunny confused, because the minute the sun comes out, it might be only like barely above freezing, but if it's a blue sky and sun, you can see people running around in shorts and t-shirts or even topless. And there's me as a Central European going, what the hell is going on here? Like I'm wearing like jumpers and like 3 layers. Everybody else is running around barely dressed in anything.
Yeah, no, that sounds perfect for me. I'm there for it.
Yeah, it's like my wife. I need like several blankets, and she just have a sheet, and that's usually where that's how different we are. So Louisville, Kentucky. How did you get into portrait photography or headshot photography originally?
Accidentally. So I, before picking up a camera, I was a sound designer for professional theater, and I did that for like 20 years. And my early and midlife crisis was leaving the theater industry. And initially I was doing website design, and I just wasn't really jamming on it, wasn't speaking to my soul. And I ended up picking up a camera to do some shots for somebody's website. Like I'd taken a photography class in high school, like back in 95, 96, just to age myself a little bit. And I was like, it's headshots and stuff. How hard can it be? And I found out real quickly that it's harder than one expects. So, but I started having more fun doing the photography side of things than I did the website side of things. And now it spiraled into where I am now.
It's an interesting thing. I've said this many times on the show. There's been so many examples of music or sound and photography kind of overlapping. I mean, there's so many, guests that I've spoken to on the show who either are musicians or, used to be into music. And that includes myself. I used to be a session musician back in the day. And then the family curse just caught up with me. So eventually I had to get into photography, I guess. But yeah, so sound design, you did theater sound?
Yes. Yeah, I started getting paid to do sound design and engineering when I was like 15. And I'd done stuff like in my middle school and whatever, but, I started getting paychecks for it later. And then I ended up at Actors Theater. I moved back home. I was in Indianapolis. I moved back to Louisville. I ended up getting a job at Actors Theater of Louisville, which at the time was one of the most respected regional theaters in the country. We did a new play festival that was, world renowned and all that jazz. And so I spent a big chunk of my career there. I think I was there for 12 years. I got to world premiere a bunch of shows. So there's a bunch of scripts out in the world with my name listed as sound designer, which is kind of cool. I've never seen one in the wild, but they exist. So yeah, it was a cool gig.
Fantastic. I think that there's a lot of commonality between music and photography as an art form in general. Do you sometimes draw from your experiences with actors and being in the theater in what you do now? Because I'm saying this because your portrait photography is very reminiscent of the old masters, I would say, but also at the same time, it also has something theatrical to it.
Thank you. I very much pull from my theater experience and my creating experience. So I was the kind of sound designer that I was always in the rehearsal process. So from like day one of a show going into the rehearsal hall, I would be in creating with the actors. So as they're finding their voices with the show and everybody, I was in that mix. So I was creating, making mistakes right along with them until, so it was organic. We had to be able to play off of each other. And I find it to be the same thing in creating portraits or headshots with clients is we have to react. It's not just, I'm going to put you in front of the camera and go, okay, smile, because that's going to be hot garbage juice, as we all know. So, I have to be able to kind of ride that emotional wave with them and figure out if I need to get them somewhere else emotionally, what I need to do to help get them to where we're getting the expressions and vibes that we need.
And it's, again, this is a topic that comes up a lot, especially when we talk about headshots on the show. It's this thing, where virtually, and I'm sure it's your experience too, I'm guessing, but certainly in my case, virtually every single person that comes through the door will say like, oh, either I hate having my photograph taken or I'm totally unphotogenic. And then the first job is to make them feel comfortable in front of the lens. What's your sort of go-to recipe to chill somebody out when they come in, they may be a little bit nervous? How do you do it?
Man, there's really no cookie cutter because everybody's so wildly different when they walk in the door. It's like I have to be able to read them like instantly as soon as I'm pointing towards the door, like you all can see it. It's over here. I've got to be able to like read their body language, be a little empathic and pick up their vibe. And I immediately know if I'm going to be meeting them at a place. It's like, hey, how's it going? And so come on, let's go get, or if it's going to be, hey, nice to see you. Cool. Let me take your stuff. Let's go back to the dressing. So it's even like just that beginning bit of where are they emotionally? How are we going to interact right out of the gate is going to set the tone for the rest of the session.
Do you predominantly shoot actors or corporates? What's your sort of mix?
For headshots, a majority of it is corporate now. When I first started, I had a lot more actors. My pricing was very different at the time. So that's why I get a lot more corporate than I do actors now. I still do get some actors, but headshot-wise, primarily corporate.
Yeah, I've found that to be true actually here as well. It seems like the majority of headshot clients that I certainly have coming through my door are predominantly corporates. And you're quite right. I think pricing might be at the core of that.
Well, like I know what I made in the theater, and I was working in a professional theater in a full-time gig. And, if I designed, I've been out of the business now for 12 years, 11, 12 years, something like that. But, at my last couple shows, to be in the rehearsal process, do the tech week, be there at opening, have, answer emails through the run of a show if something was going wrong, it's $1,500. That's not a lot. Like, the industry doesn't pay a lot. So that's no slam on actors for maybe not being able to afford my rates. Like, the industry's tough financially. So I get it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's no different. It's no different in London. London is one of the central places for theatre, certainly in the UK, if not in Europe. Competition is high. And of course, there's like, I don't know, what is it? 12 million people or something. You can ride the prices or the salaries to the bottom, in this environment. So that's, that's very similar over here. So how did you get from the theater to doing headshots in particular? Did you have a plan originally, or did you just fall into headshots?
When I first started, I had no plan whatsoever. I knew that I was like, okay, if I'm going to be a photographer, we're going to go. Well, let's just step on the gas and see what happens. And I would literally shoot anything that you would put in front of me. So, babies, I did a couple weddings. A friend was making like homemade candy to sell. So I was like, yeah, I'll shoot your candy. Anything that you put in front of me. And what I was finding was that I couldn't get traction anywhere. It was because everybody's like, well, what do you actually do? And I finally, it clicked with me one day. I was like, man, I know headshots. And I still kind of wanted to keep my toe in my theater world. I've done it for 20 years. So, that's the world that I knew. And so that's when it was like, man, let's do headshots. I've been looking at them forever. And then I really focused in on the path from there. And people decided that I was okay at it. So,
it sounds very, very similar to my origins, as a portrait photographer. Actually, to be honest with you, I was a musician, a session musician. At some point, I simply stepped off of the stage and I started shooting what was happening on the stage. And then I very quickly realized, in the beginning, you have lots of friends who, like, I don't know, put a new band together and they go like, hey, man, can you do some band photos for us? Sure, cool, I could do it. And then it got to the point where, somebody says like, oh, how much would you charge for band photos? And I very quickly realized that most people that are in a band don't actually have any money. So, so you can't actually charge industry standard prices. You have to go in super cheap, basically. And, I thought like, well, okay, well, that's not a way to make a living, obviously, and so I then immediately also I thought like, okay, well, what can I do that's maybe commercially a little bit more viable and actually is fun to shoot and, and a modern form of portraiture, essentially. And yeah, I came across headshots and loved it,
Yeah, and the other great thing about headshots, like with so many forms of portrait photography, it's while we feel everybody needs great, beautiful portraits to hang on their wall, people don't necessarily feel the same way. It's not a necessity in their life. And so many people have had really crappy photo experiences. The idea of stepping in front of a camera is mortifying. Headshots, they need them. Like we're in a world now where, LinkedIn and social media and websites and everybody so needs one. So starting a business as a headshot photographer is like, okay, I'm starting a business with a product that people actually need.
Absolutely. And it's, it's true in the commercial world or in the corporate world as much as it is, of course, the acting world, because actors need headshots because that's how they get auditions at the end of the day. And, so it's a necessity. So what is I'm going to especially sort of talk about your portrait photography, mainly because I really find it very, very stunning. The portrait itself and also the boudoir side of it, I find it really interesting. You really have a really interesting style. It's very, like I said earlier, it's very kind of very painterly. The lighting is gorgeous. What's your creative process when it comes to portrait photography in particular?
I stare at a lot of other art and things that that'll make me stop and lose a sense of time for a minute first. So, I got Louisville's fortunate to have a great art museum here in the city, and then Cincinnati's just like an hour up the road. There's a gorgeous museum there, a couple of them. So just being able to spend time with the pieces is really the beginning of my creative process. It letting the pieces that speak to me get into my head and rattle around a little bit. And that starts to inform what I want to do when I'm photographing either clients or if I'm doing personal projects. Then from there, like if I'm working with a client, I talk with them beforehand about what their hopes and dreams are for their portrait session, what they're envisioning. Not everybody is going to be into fully formal, putting on their tuxes and their gowns and all the good jewelry. A lot of, like, I just did a couple the other day. They're like, man, we're casual. And, like they showed up like in flannels and jeans. And I'm like, cool. So how do we take this sort of classic style and translate that to a very contemporary dress and make it work? And like, and so I'm thinking through their personality and all that, how to incorporate all of that into portraits. And what we got is actually really gorgeous. I'm thrilled with what we created with them. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of artistic psychobabble there for a moment. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the thing I always wonder when I look at portraiture, just like yourselves, is I wonder, like, okay, what's the origin of that idea? Is it basically, you look at a portrait, like a painting, for instance, you go like, okay, I want to create something like that, and that's where it starts, or is it more like guided by the client, for example? Like, does a client come in and they have a very specific idea of what they want, or what's the process there usually? How do you find that balance?
I think it's really a combo of both. So at this point, a majority of people that hire me for my portrait and my boudoir work are hiring me because of my style. So they've been on the website, they've been on my social media, and they see what I do. And honestly, I book more boudoir than I do classic portraits, which is not what I anticipated when I ended up down that path. But I'm getting hired for the style. So then from there, she's boudoir client I had yesterday. She wanted it. She did not help me with prep work at all. A lot of times I'll ask for, what are you planning on wearing? Just because I like to, let it percolate in my head. And she sent me nothing. So one piece that she showed up with that she wanted to wear, it was a red lingerie set and then a leather harness. So my brain immediately kicks into, you're doing red with a leather harness. That, to me, I feel like there needs to be some attitude in the face, not necessarily bitchy, but this isn't going to be soft and demure. It doesn't. So like at that point, the styling was kind of dictating how I approached the vibe of those images versus when we got to doing some nude work with fabric drape, those felt far softer. And so that styling really dictated the vibe of the images. Yeah.
Because that's the thing about boudoir photography, is there's a really wide range from, like you said, very soft draped materials to, what's the word? To like a lot of a much harder look, the leather and, what's it, vinyl type of look, for the lack of a better word.
Yeah. And it's like, and for me, the challenge with a lot of the modern looks is because I really only use the term boudoir with my work is because it's what SEO, people know to Google it. I don't think, I envision boudoir. I'm envisioning, people pulling on various garments and leaning off of couches with ankles over heads and stuff, which is cool. It's just not my jam. So, trying to figure out how to make the more modern bits of styling fit within sort of that classic vibe, so you kind of get the best of both worlds, is an interesting but fun challenge.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platypod tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. Yeah, it really is interesting, because that's exactly what I thought when I looked at your boudoir photography in particular. I sort of thought, well, it's actually, from the boudoir photography that I've seen, and some of former guests that I've had on, this is really, your photography is really different, because it is, like, I think half the time, it's just an amazing portrait. And it's possibly not necessarily what you would traditionally associate with boudoir photography, in a sense.
Right, and thank you. And if it weren't for SEO, I don't know that I would call it boudoir. And I can do some of the boudoir. I get clients who really want to do traditional boudoir sort of looks, and I can do that. But it doesn't scratch that artistic itch for me quite as much, but I'm happy to do it for people too. Because ultimately, if somebody commissions me, I'm there to create for them. If I want to create something else, I'll do it on my own time.
Yeah, that's ultimately what it boils down to. If a client has a particular idea that they want to, create, then okay, well then fine. Otherwise, I know this, like, half the time, well, not half the time, most of the time, really, I have clients who basically, just like you mentioned, you look at your website and they really like what they see, and they come in, they don't really have necessarily a very clear idea, other than they like what they've seen on the website, and they sort of kind of want that, but that is a very wide range of what it could be.
Right. And I try to ask a lot of questions, and, when I'm doing a consult with somebody, I flip through images that I've done and go, tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like. And then once I have some ideas of what they do like, we can get a little bit more in depth, and I can go, okay, without inflating my ego, or inflate my ego, that's fine too. What is it that speaks to you about this image? Just because that lets me know where they are and what they're actually looking for in their portraits. When I'm commissioned to create work, I think it's really important to really get to the heart of what it is that they're looking for, because that's ultimately how we make money. If I can actually create what speaks to their soul, I get paid.
Exactly, and also it makes for a happy client. That's the thing.
Yes.
Like, especially if we come back to the beginning of this conversation, we said, like, okay, well, most people walk in being a little bit nervous, with the attitude like, I've never had a great photo taken of myself. Then you really want to try and turn them around so that they leave the studio thinking, I had a great experience. This was awesome. I can't believe it looks that great. That's really what you want. And so I use a very similar technique to what you just described, but I do it as part of the headshot session. So what I tend to do is I tend to shoot some burners, is what I call them. Like, I get the client in front of the lens, start shooting maybe for, I don't know, like 5 minutes, 6 minutes, something like that. And then I pull them out, and I basically have them come over to the screen, and we'll go through the shots that I've taken up to that point. And as they look at the screen and they flip through it, I watch them, and I'll basically figure out what it is that they like and what it is that they don't like. Because everybody's got, I don't know, a preferred side or a particular look or something, whatever. And so I can, and it's through conversation and through watching them very closely, I can figure out what it is that they don't like, and then I get them back in front of the lens, and I just don't do what they don't like. It's really as simple as that.
Yeah, and God bless shooting tethered. I everything that I shoot is tethered for that very reason. Headshot sessions, I do it with the portrait and boudoir sessions as well. more with the portrait and boudoir. I do it because if I get a really great image, it's really nice to be able to turn the screen around and go, I keep trying to not curse on your podcast, so if something slips, I apologize. Okay, that's even better. But to be able to turn the screen and go, this is amazing, and then they see that it's amazing, and it's a confidence builder for them, because like once they know that there's something really good in the can, all of the pressure goes away. Now we're just having fun the rest of the day. So yeah, I love being able to do headshots, portraits, boudoir. It makes life so much better.
And I mean, that's even more important when you're talking about boudoir photography, because people, I think, people must feel a lot more exposed, because not only are they having a picture taken of themselves, but also they're not really wearing many clothes. So it's even more exposing. So getting that, extra bit of a confidence booster is super important in that case.
Absolutely. And they also, like I play with a lot of heavy shadow and things, so they can't see, when I'm hitting them with strobes, they don't know what shadow is doing. So once they see things and they feel like it makes them feel better. I had a whole other sentence that tried to come out there and it just stopped right up there.
Yeah, well, it's a thing. Everybody's self-conscious, and again, in a situation where you're having your picture taken. I mean, if you're not, unless you're a professional model and you're used to taking your clothes off, basically in front of the camera, but the vast majority of people are not, and so even just having their face photographed is an act, rather than compared to like imagining that you're taking most of your clothes off, and you're
right.
Literally exposing yourself. What do they say in British English? Warts and all, to the camera. And it's like, it's one of those things. Yeah, it's super important to build up the confidence. Okay, so one of the central things I want to talk about with you today is what the difference is, or let's say what makes a great portrait as opposed to a good one, in your opinion.
Does it make you feel? It's so there's one of the first portraits that actually made me go, oh yeah, portraits, I want to do this style of stuff. When I had it printed and I hung it in my old studio and got it in a frame, I had hung it up on the wall, and I went and I sat back on the couch for a minute just to, kind of get the vibe for it. And like 45 minutes later, I looked at my watch and realized I just lost track of time, just staring at the piece. And it's like that piece made me feel in such a way that like, okay, that is gorgeous. Whether it's technically gorgeous or whatever, I don't care in the moment. It's touching my soul. So to me, that has value. And, not just my work, there's, countless times I've been in museums, or, I have, my wife and I collect art, and we have friends that collect art, and being able to, just sit in front of a piece and get lost in it, is really kind of magical. I don't know of another way to describe it. And there's various things that can make us, feel about it. You've got my dog back over here. So, I mean, that picture of SETI, it gets me. I know that look on his face, and if it makes me feel, it's a good piece.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that, because I mean, what you can see is right on this side over here, I have two portraits of my dog when he was a puppy. One is where I'm holding him, and then another one where my wife is holding him. And so they're kind of family portraits, but they involve our baby, which is our dog, and it's like, it's one of these things that was quite important to me to shoot that when he was little. I mean, yeah, he was probably about maybe 5 months old or something, or maybe 5 or 6 months old when I took those. So he's a spaniel, and his tail wasn't fully fluffy at that point, so relatively young. But
And see, but just like the memories that you're having with that, and his tail wasn't there, is like there's emotion based behind that. And I think that even if the viewer of a piece doesn't know the initial emotion behind the art created, they're still gonna feel something. They're gonna be able to look at a piece when there's feeling and go and just feel more, as opposed to it was just a random selfie or something. Like, yeah, it's a selfie, you captured the moment, but it's not. There's a difference.
And it's also extremely subjective, of course. Some people might look at a particular portrait and not really necessarily feel anything, but then to other people, they might associate it with a certain thing. Like I remember, for myself, for example, I remember, on a very personal level. So I used to not appear in photographs for about 10 to 15 years of my life because I was very self-conscious of the fact that I had an issue with my front teeth. So my upper teeth were basically starting to grind down, and so the smile line was basically inverted, And so I was very extremely self-conscious of that at the time. And so I sort of always made sure that either I wasn't in a photograph or if it was inevitable, I would like keep my mouth shut, basically, And it was only after I had my teeth fixed that all of a sudden, having a photograph taken became a completely different experience, and so and then of course I got I then got into photography, and it's still to this day I do a lot of self-portraits, not because I'm particularly vain or anything, but mainly because I practice certain things. Like if I figure out like a new lighting setup, I'll try, and obviously I've used and abused my wife and my children so many times over the last 15 years and have forced them in front of the camera that they're not necessarily always that cooperative these days, So I am my own willing victim when it comes to this, but so and I try to create things that are maybe a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit comical or whatever. And sometimes I look at portraits and think like, wow, it's really interesting because like 15 years ago, there wouldn't have been a chance in hell you would have got me in front of a camera, not a chance, And now I feel very, very comfortable with it, And I think that's very often that's the sort of emotional state or states that a client goes through if they're not, if they never really like to have their portrait taken, and then they come to you and then see the end result and go, wow, I never thought that was even possible.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that we now kind of battle in that world is body dysmorphia and social media expectations. I think social media has been very bad for the human psyche on a lot of levels, and people's feelings about themselves it's really manifesting. And so that's one of the places where we get to be a little bit of psychologist in doing what we do as well, because it's unfair of them to themselves to compare themselves to unrealistic expectations when a lot of the people that you're seeing on social media or media, whatever, have teams of stylists and makeup artists, and they didn't get that photograph in one shot. It's all these other things that then our clients, our real people, are trying to compare against. And
Photoshop, plain and simple.
Yeah, and now AI on top of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that, there's no limit. I find it.
Yeah.
You mentioned social media. I find it really. I find it hilarious when I see my kids taking selfies of themselves on their phone because 100% guaranteed there's going to be some filter that's going to be applied, for some effect. And I always think like, oh well, you don't, I think, yeah, but you don't actually look like that. That's not.
And what's that going to do to you in 30 years when you look back? I know what happens when I look at, yearbook photos of me from high school or whatever. and my hairline wasn't quite as far back and whatever, but I didn't have filters on it to then skew it, now I'd be a disaster.
Yeah, it's you give them the tools, they are going to use them. That's that's the thing.
Oh yeah, I would have totally used them. I just would have put a
100%.
mess about it now.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Yeah, there's if 15 years ago or like maybe 20 years ago, if I'd had the Photoshop skills I have now, I would have just, fixed my teeth in every single photograph. Yeah, no problem. Just let me do this. But, back then, oh my God, people shoot on film. That's how long ago that was.
What? Yeah. I do miss film a little bit, but then on the other side, I don't miss it at all. So it's a love-hate thing.
Yeah, I mean, my grandmother and my dad used to shoot on film, and so I grew up with the smells of developers and chemicals, and I don't miss that, I have to say. There's a little bit of nostalgia that I have for that, of course. That's part of it, but would I want to do that on a daily basis? Definitely not. 100%. As a I don't know, almost like as a hobby. Yeah, once in a while, for sure.
No, and I live with a husky, so there's no chance of keeping any bit of film without it. Every photo would have bits of dog on it. So, sorry.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. So how do you approach lighting in your portraiture? Because that's the one thing I think that's really noticeable. Like, your lighting is so accurate and beautiful. What is your concept in general?
For a lot of the work, I am very inspired by the Dutch masters. I tend to gravitate towards a little bit more of a moody, dramatic style in my work. I really like shadow. So it really starts there. What the image is supposed to be is going to dictate how moody I'm going to be about. Like, I did a portrait of my mother, I guess 2 years ago now, that she wanted for over her fireplace. And it's like, I know where that's going in her house, so that can't be quite as moody and not with the vibe that she's going for. But yeah, it just, I really like that 1-2 big light feel of things. We were teaching a class, me and another photographer teaching a class in here a couple of weeks ago. And I, said to the class, I was like, if a window was good enough for Rembrandt, it's good. That one light sort of vibe is good enough for me. So yeah, that's where it really starts, is just that sort of inspiration. And, not only the Dutch masters, but, looking at, John Singer Sargent, Frank Duveneck, and some of the Impressionist guys as well, who were typically using, if they were doing portraiture inside, it would be a window light coming from one side to really do most of the work for them. So I think I've just stared at enough of it now that it's burned itself into my brain.
Yeah. And I often think that, in a sense, you can very easily overcomplicate things with lighting setups, because there's no end to how many lights you could put on someone, and before you know it, you're 5 lights in and you go, I'm not really sure whether I really actually need any of that.
When I was first starting, there were some great photographers who were just starting to push into the education scene, who were really focusing on lighting, and they would go, okay, so this is a 12 light setup. And I was completely overwhelmed. I was like, 12? It's one person? Why on earth do you need 12? And it worked great for them, but I would just, that's too complicated. I don't want to think that much. 2, 3 tops, and 9 times out of 10, I'm good.
That's the thing, and I have a similar experience, because on one hand, I love the simplicity of like a one light setup. I just love it. It's got something really, really natural to it, and there's a natural beauty to it. But at the same time, I also like the sort of Joe McNally, put 24 lights in the background and light every nook and cranny with like X amount of different filters and make it look incredible, but then just put one light on the model. Oh, that's it.
Yeah, and you're saying that, and I thought about food. It's like I'm really the same way with food. Like I'm, I can do big, extravagant, biggly boo, whatever. But I really tend to go to really just simple, beautiful ingredients when I'm cooking. Like so I really just get the essence. I'd never thought about it that way before. So evidently, you put me on the couch this afternoon, and I have to go explore my artistic brain a little bit more.
Well, I mean, food is a great analogy for so many different things. I mean, it works with music as well. I used to say that when I used to teach jazz harmony, so jazz chords essentially. Because you get kids coming in with no experience with jazz, or people who predominantly listen to pop music, or like Western contemporary pop music or whatever, or rock music, and they're just not used to hearing all of these color tones in those chords. And to that, very often it sounds weird. It sounds like there's a lot of dissonance going on, and it just sounds weird. And so the way I used to describe it, I used to completely compare it to foods. I used to say, like, look, your basic major or minor chords, like your basic 3-note chords, that's like your basic super simple pasta sauce, like that you can make if you've got nothing left in the cupboard. You need a tin of tomatoes and some olive oil, and that's basically it. I mean, and some salt and pepper. That's it. You can make a very basic sauce. It's gonna taste pretty bland, but it'll work. It'll get you through your dinner, right? But if you have other stuff, you can throw in some other things. You can throw in some oregano, or you can throw in some chili, or whatever it may be. And each one of these ingredients has a very specific effect. Like chili will make it taste hot, and just like in music, you have a basic chord, and you throw in an extra note, and that note will basically enhance that chord. And each additional note that you throw in will have a very specific effect. Like this note will make the chord sound bluesy, and that will make it sound, slightly jazzy or whatever, And then of course you can throw in oregano, chili, and I don't know, something else, and you get these additional effects. And the same thing is true with chords. You can add one note, but you can also add 3 extra notes and then see what happens then. And so, food was always like a great comparison.
G, C, and D.
That's all you need. Yeah. I mean, in fact,
I was going to say, but like using the food with the food analogy, with taking it back to portrait photography. So my lighting setup and everything is really pretty much the foundation of my portrait recipe. It's like here's my base flavors. Here's the roux, if you will, and then the extra herbs and spices and all of that jazz is, for me, it comes from the person that I'm photographing. It's like, how can I tweak with your expression if your eyes do something big? And I started with headshot photography, so paying attention to expression is really ingrained in me. So it's not uncommon when I'm working with somebody to keep them in a pose for a second and guide them through 7, 8, 9 different expressions to see what different story that can tell. That's the extra. There's a little tarragon in there. There's a little, whatever, to really change the flavor of the image. Little expressions, little tweaks for me. Slight tilt of the head, whatever. It can really change the entire vibe. And I find that very interesting and a fun way to muck around with the recipe.
How do you?
We're going to make people hungry on this.
Oh yeah, 100%. That's the side podcast on the Camera Shake Network. There'll be a food podcast next. Which you mentioned roux, right? I know what I'm going to have for dinner this weekend. That's for sure. Bring out the gumbo, 100%.
It's right time. Mardi Gras technically ending, but it still works. Yeah.
Oh,
it'd be perfect.
Look, gumbo all year round in this household, 100%. That is happening.
Nice.
My kids are huge fans as well, so it's it helps. That's I spent some time in New Orleans, so that's where all of that influence comes from originally.
Oh, beautiful! I've yet to get down there, and we keep talking about it. and just keep not going. So I need to remedy that problem.
100%. Yeah. Even if it's just for a tour through, a variety of restaurants, it's definitely worth it. 100%.
Absolutely.
So, how do you guide your client or your sitter, whatever you want to call it? How do you guide them through different expressions? What's your sort of vocabulary that you use for that?
So I never stop talking when we're working. So I'm constantly, try moving your head this way. It's direct direction would be what it is. Go here, go here, go here. And then because I've spent this session getting a vibe for them, I get information from them. What gets said in these walls does not leave these walls. So we've heard some stuff in here. I can start using that to actually touch personal notes, and so they'll react without before they realize they reacted, and so there's some beauty that happens there. I will often do things. I have no shame. At 46 years old now, I don't care anymore. So I will do things to elicit a laugh and shoot through that. But it's all little tweaks, unless I'm going for a big laugh where, I can be, really calm and really mellow, and then just throw something completely asinine and get a big pop. But I normally won't go for the big pop until I know I've got everything else I want mellow in the can. But it's treating people like people. It's talking, and as I was saying earlier, every person is different. So I have to be with them emotionally the entire time. And that's where those genuine range of expressions come from. It's also like, I typically won't do, because of that, more than 1 or 2 portrait or boudoir sessions in a week. Because emotionally, for me, being the introverted me that I am, it takes a lot out of me to do that. So I need time to recharge on the back. Headshot sessions are a little bit different. I can do a few more of those, but a full-scale portrait or boudoir session will make me sleep for a day.
You're absolutely right. It is quite draining, because I think, generally speaking, obviously, when it comes to working with other humans, photographing other humans, it does require a large amount of, sensitivity and really just knowing how to connect with that person. Because, as you say, people are different, and people connect on different levels almost, or in different ways. And I think it's always easier when you're just naturally an extrovert sort of person. But artists often are not. And then, as you say, it does take a lot out of you. I feel that too. I feel like sometimes I'm quite clearly putting on an act when I'm with a client. I'm still myself, but I'm like sort of a hyper real version of myself. And then when they go, I'm like, whoa, okay.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a professional wrestling nerd, so sorry. But all of the best pro wrestling gimmicks throughout history, it was that performer just turned up to 11. And it's the same thing in working with a client. It's like, I'm still me, I'm not going to be anybody else, but I do have to, turn the gain up just a little bit to be there. And but it's draining. It's not uncommon for me to take a nap directly after a session.
Let's talk a little bit about post-processing, because obviously your images look perfect. What's your process when it comes to post-processing your images?
Sure. It's really fairly simple, I think. So I shoot tethered into Capture One. So I will do any basic raw edits in Capture One before I move image into Photoshop. And then I will do, basic cleanup with your, healing brushes and clone stamps and what have you. Depending on the size of the image, I will either do a localized dodge and burn to smooth some things out, or if it's only going to be like an 8x10 or 8x12, I just go straight to frequency separation. Then I do kind of a global dodge and burn to create contrast and, accentuate highlights and things. I do a color grading, set, and I use a lot of luminosity masks in my color grading. I've got some basic actions that I've built that are like, I know these are going to work for some of my setups. So especially like if I'm doing client work, I can just, instead of rebuilding, 9-10 layers and luminosity mask on each every time, I can just run the action. Little bit of sharpen and send it home. It's a pretty basic process, really.
Do you deliver the images as prints or as digital files?
I do both. So anything that a client purchases, they will also get the web resolution digital file of that. If a client does go, I really only want digitals, and which for some reason still happens, I will sell them to them, but they get sold and at the same prices that I sell my photo albums. It's like, you can buy the album and you're going to get the web res, or I can just sell you the web res and no overhead for me, and you're going to get the same thing. So, whatever.
So I've been following your Instagram a little bit, and I love your reels. There's one particular thing where I think you're going through sort of rebuilding your studio setup in behind you, which I found quite interesting. I think you sort of redressed the room. How long did that take? Because on the reel, obviously, it looks like it took 10 seconds, but what went into that?
So much mess. So the studio that I'm in now, it'll be 3 years in July that I've been in this space. My old studio, which I loved, but had to move for various reasons. When I had to leave that space, I still didn't have a new space. Well, I was studio homeless for a couple months, which was disconcerting. And when I took this place, it was rough. It had been sitting vacant for 2 years. The walls were a canary yellow, and the ceiling was all like the grade school drop ceiling tiles. There was a lot of stuff that had to happen in here. So over the matter of about 6 weeks, me and my folks, my parents were really helpful in doing this, did the transformation on the place. And I was still taking clients while the transformation was happening. So to my first several clients who were in the space, thank you all for being cool, because this place was awful. So drywall dust everywhere.
Yeah, I was going to ask you whether you rented a different, another studio just to get on with shoots, or
no, just had to make it work. It's my old school punk rock me came out and was like, we're just going with it. And because this place at the time, it increased my overhead to such a place that I couldn't go rent another space. Like I took a big risk in stepping up to this space. This space is about 2,200 square feet. So I wasn't planning on spending this much, but it's worked out. I'm in a good area and all of that. So sometimes no risk, no reward. But no, it was rough. It took some time, and there's still stuff to do. I still need to do the bathrooms. I just got burned out on being covered in construction dust. So I finally bought the paint and all of that. And I'm getting ready to start the bathroom renovations.
How did you fix the ceiling? Because obviously, I saw on Instagram, I saw the original ceiling, and now of course your ceiling looks amazing. How did you do that?
These are plastic tiles. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and I just did some Googling, and these came up, and they are just literally little thin plastic tiles. They're expensive for what they are, but it was like I'd rather spend the money and have it look like something than feel like I'm in second grade again. And I'm trying to remember the name of the website where I bought them now, and it's completely walked out of my head. But they do a bunch of different styles too. You can get ones like with like press 10 and all sorts of stuff. It's a really cool product.
Yeah. Plus, if with the sort of the traditional drop ceiling, like office ceiling type of fake ceiling type of tiles, you really always have to make sure that doesn't show up in the shot, first of all, and secondly, it's also just it's just unsightly to look at. So that's the thing.
Yeah, and you can't clean them, because like if these get dusty, dirty, I can come through with a Swiffer and just take care of it. So I wanted this place to feel, and any of my spaces, I want them to feel special. The space is as much part of the vibe that of what I do as anything else. Like, people need to walk in the space and feel comfortable, and also like it's elevated. They need to feel like they're doing something special. So I needed the space to help them with it. Like, I think about some of the nicer restaurants or things that we'll go to. You walk into a Waffle House or whatever, and you're like, yeah, it's a restaurant, whatever. You walk into a really nice restaurant that's decorated well and all that, and it enhances the experience. So I wanted to do that same vibe with my space.
And that's super important. I think to me that's really important, because it differentiates what you do from what 90% of other people do. Where it's like you come to this. I mean, that's actually, to be honest with you, that's the reason why I really like shooting from home. So I shoot my shooting spaces at home, and there are advantages and disadvantages to that. But the advantage is that I'm completely in control, over what this space looks like. But also, it creates a certain level of comfort for when I have headshot sessions or headshot clients come in, they feel a little bit more comfortable rather than being in like a clinical looking white traditional studio with bare walls and maybe an infinity wall or something like that. It's immediately a little bit intimidating. Whilst here, it's comfortable. There's a couch. You can sit down, have a coffee. I can get them relaxed. We can take it, one step at a time. And so it really makes a huge difference. If it wasn't for a stupid dog who really doesn't like other people.
Poor pup.
I know. He's always a good talking point, though. He's not an aggressive dog. But he well, it takes a little while to get on his friendly side, let's put it this way. So I have to keep him out in the hallway. And so it's immediately a talking point, because he does look, it's just one of these things. Yeah, he actually does look super cute. And people naturally go, ooh, doggy. And I'm always like, oh, don't do that. That's not a good idea.
See, now you're going to get me started to talk dog training, and then the podcast will never end. So that's that's a found passion that I evidently have after working with. I keep doing that after working with him for 2 years. Yeah, I got quite into training. So,
training is a difficult thing. I'll tell you. I mean, my dog he's a frequent visitor of this podcast, because often, if you listen really closely, you can hear his little paws on the wooden floor moving through. It's usually he's out in the hallway, but he manages to break in every now and then you can hear him just like jump off the couch or walk through. I think he's actually been on the podcast a couple of times. He certainly was. I made a video for Platypod not too long ago, and he was one of the main features in it. So if anybody's interested,
if I wasn't doing this today, Cedric would be here with me. I just knew that he will often, if I'm doing a video call or anything, and he can't hear the other person, he's like, "Who are you talking to?" And so he gets a little talky. Yeah. So he went to daycare today. So,
oh, okay. I saw I saw you've added pet photography to your portfolio as well, more recently, I guess.
Yes.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, I keep tossing around the idea of going to go train to be a dog trainer officially, and the dog training world is kind of the Wild West. There's no real guidance and certifications, and I don't want to be like, if I'm going to do it, I actually want to learn all the correct stuff. So I was talking with a guy that I was considering hiring to be a mentor, and he's like, you really need to get your hands on as many dogs as possible, because all different breeds, all different situations and everything, they're all going to be different. The more experience you have with that, the better trainer you're going to be. And he was like, why don't you do pet photography? And then I was like, why don't I do pet photography? Not even just from a training standpoint, I know what I spend on my dog. Let's get other people in. So that was really kind of the impetus behind it. If you're watching the reels, somebody actually just did a post the other day and saying, oh, I would bring my dog in, but they get too excited when they leave the house. And I was like, do you want tips on how to keep your dog from getting excited on not leaving the house? I'll do videos. And she's like, yeah. So I'm going to be doing some dog training videos related to pet portrait photography on the reels soon. So it's like all my worlds are starting to combine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, I don't think that's necessarily unusual. It's, in fact, I think it's probably quite, it's quite common, especially in photography. Like I've spoken to so many people, when it comes to like toy photography, people who just love action figures, and Marvel comics and Star Wars, and they naturally gravitate towards shooting toys, and just sometimes with amazing results. I'm thinking like, the likes of Jesse Fire Eisen, for example, or Dave the Berrymaker. Like these are guys that create incredible imagery, with toys, and yet this is art, I mean, the amount of effort that goes into, like, I don't know, building these dioramas and like even 3D printing, and it's just, my mind's completely blown. But of course, the same thing is really true for pets, for animals, dogs in particular. I remember having a really great conversation with Katie one time about her real obsession with dogs, and so it's no coincidence that she's a pet photographer, because she's just obsessed with dogs, and it's quite natural to be drawn to that, I think.
Absolutely. And thinking about it from the social media standpoint, we as photographers for years and years and years have gone, we post our photos and like, look at my photo. Aren't they pretty? Aren't they pretty? And I'm guilty. I still do it. But that's not really giving any real value to our audience, other than, oh, okay, that's yeah, okay. As opposed to, if there are things that we can help them with and tie it into our photography stuff, now we're giving them value. Now more people are going to remember us more. So, me knowing how to help somebody keep their dog from getting excited when they leave the house brings value to a community. And when they are ready to go get pet portraits done, they're going to go, oh yeah, the big guy in the kilt. And, well, at least hopefully. So, yeah.
And it's also, I think it's funny, especially when we're talking social media. I think it's introducing the character into that world, which is always fun. My daughter's been on that journey with my youngest daughter's been on that journey with me ever since she was very little, because it's just, we hang out together a lot. And so she used to come with me on photo shoots, and, she's stood in for me. Now she's at the point where she literally she looks at your phone, or at her phone, and then, every time she realizes I'm ready to click the shutter button, she'll just pop up like a perfect model. And, as soon as the flash's gone, she's like back on her phone, pose, back on her phone, So that's her. But she's also, she's developed an interest in photography, particularly in dog photography. I've told this story on I think several times on this podcast, but we have lakes around where we live here. And obviously they are popular with dog walkers. And so you can find any breed of dog, being walked there. And so we went to the lakes one time, and I think I got her, I don't know, she was using a Fuji. Yeah, she was using a Fuji X100F or something that I gave her. And so I had a different camera. We walked to the lakes, and we were talking, and she said, "Oh, yeah, I really like photography." And I go, "That's cool, you know. What do you like? What do you like shooting? Like, she goes, "Oh, well, I don't like shooting people." I'm like, okay, fair enough. What do you like shooting? She goes, like, "I like shooting dogs." I'm like, okay, that sounds good. It's perfect. And then she said, like, "Oh, I want to shoot some dogs around the lakes here." And I said to her, well, "Okay, that sounds great, but just be mindful, and ask the owner first whether it's okay to photograph the dog, because some people can get a little bit, annoyed. Or, although that being said, when you have a little girl with a camera walk up to anybody and ask them whether they can photograph everybody will say yes.
Yeah, instant yes.
Instant yes, yeah, exactly. But the problem is, and they're trying to post their dogs, and the dog's like really not into that. They're like, "Look this way, look this way," and so that's usually where it goes pear-shaped. But I thought, I mean, she was like, oh, she's then maybe not 8, 9 or something, and I thought, okay, of course, as a parent, I'm going to have to go and make that introduction and ask the question and stuff. But far from it, she was so full of confidence. She literally went from one person to the next and just went, "Excuse me, so do you mind if I, photograph your dog?" And of course, everybody went, "Oh, yes, of course." Yeah. So she got some good shots as well.
That's fantastic.
I know. So yeah. So with dog photography, there's one thing I always wonder when it comes to dog photography, and this is like really something I haven't figured out with my own dog. Like, how do you get a dog to sit still long enough to take their portrait image, especially if they're as well lit as the portrait of your own dog?
So I teach. Cedric, we have a sit stay. So he knows if I put him in a sit, he's not to break that sit until I tell him free. So whether he's in a sit, whether he's in a down, it's like if you tell you to do a thing, that's where you are. I'm not doing it to be mean. I'm doing it because I need you to do something. So, and we use it with everything. It's like if I'm opening the door, you're going to go in a sit because I don't want you running out the door. So I actually did a TikTok reel about the sit stay a while back. It's been a couple weeks now, but showing people how to train that sit stay. If a dog is new to the studio or doesn't know a sit stay, first things first is any dog that comes into the space is going to be a little bit excited at first. They're going to be like, I'm in a new spot. I got to check this out. And, because Cedric's here all the time, they're going to smell Cedric. They're going to smell other dogs. So really at that point, it just hang out for a minute, let the dog get comfortable and get cool. And then it's, depending on the dog and their level of training, it's sometimes you may not get them to stay in a position. You just have to kind of keep hoping and working. Yeah, it's patience.
I bet. Yeah. I mean, it's especially because some dogs are just uncontrollable.
Yeah. And if there's been no training behind it at all, and then, yeah, that can be more of a challenge. And I talk about that with people before I photograph their pets. It's like, I'm going to do my best to get photos of your animals. But it's also an animal, if they're not cooperating, we can't force them to cooperate. We're going to do our best. Yeah. A client of mine brought in one of her chickens during a shoot, and it's like, it's chicken. We're going to do our best. We got some great photos of the chicken. Luckily, the chicken was highly food motivated. So freeze-dried mealworms did wonders. But yeah, you have to work with the animal's time. Don't force them. And if you try to force an animal to do something, it's like forcing a 3-year-old. It's not going to work.
Yeah, it's all about motivation. And again, I remember having a chat with Kaylee Greer about that. She told me she has like a whole bag full of like squeaky things and like little squeakers and like toys and balls and fluffy things and whatever. And of course treats as well, because not all dogs are food motivated. Like my dog, for instance, is absolutely not food motivated. He just couldn't care less. And so toys are the thing for him. Anything that squeaks, anything that looks like a ball, game. Yeah, exactly. But food, not so much. In fact, often when we're out, He won't even take a treat. He's just not interested. He's too busy sniffing around and checking things out to be interested in food. So with him, it's toy motivation. That's the thing.
Yeah, and I keep all those things around for when I'm working with pets. Cedric isn't really food motivated either. So when we train, I'll have treats and things with me, but most of the time I have one of his tug toys as well, because his tug toy, like, that's a reward. So knowing what the dog likes is useful. It's because once they realize, oh, if I do X, I get paid, then it's a little bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you light pet portraits? Do you still light them like you would light an ordinary portrait, like with soft boxes and things like that?
Yeah, like, so for example, the photo of Cedric back here, he's lit the exact same way that I light a majority of my portrait clients. So it's a simple, like a 4-foot octabox as my key light, and I typically have like a 6-foot fill behind me, and or I'm shooting into a white wall behind me. I have a strobe that'll hit it, but just simple, especially when photographing a dog or a chicken or a pig at one point. Like, if I had a lot more lights out, it's for people too. If I have to think about the technical when I'm working, the portraits aren't going to be successful because I can't focus on the person. So I try to make the technical as simple as possible.
Yeah, and again, that's a major advantage of using really minimal lights, is what I was thinking. And then just literally set it and forget it, and then just focus on the expression and the pose and all the rest of it. It really makes all the difference. In actual fact, that's the main reason behind why recently I changed lighting brands, because I just ran into so many problems with the brand that I used to shoot with, because it just wasn't. In a nutshell, when Nikon switched from DSLRs to mirrorless cameras, the triggers of that brand that I used to shoot that shall remain nameless, the triggers all of a sudden didn't really adapt very well to the mirrorless hot shoot. Basically, whatever they changed, I don't know, whatever it was that they changed, but so it was just a nightmare getting to work properly, and actually it was a nightmare getting them to make contact properly with the contacts in a hot shoot, and so and it became such a pain that eventually I just thought, yeah, I have to like eliminate that issue. I need to be done with that and move on, because I can't be dealing with that. When you're trying to concentrate on the client, you're trying to relax the client, and yet on the inside you're breaking up because you're thinking like, oh no, hopefully no another misfire, because the damn thing isn't making contact, and it's just not worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I can't even add to that. That's perfect. It's spot on. If I'm thinking about my gear, we're not having a good day.
Yeah. So how do you adapt your style between, let's say, portraits, boudoir, and even pet photography? How do you make any changes, or how do you adapt to that?
I don't. I really view all of them as really the same thing. It's really just, where am I putting light and shadow, and how much shadow do I want? To me, they're all just still, it's just portrait. If with the boudoir work, especially if I'm trying to do some of the draped shadow stuff, I think a lot more about exactly where I want shadows to go. It's, like if I'm doing a shot of somebody's back, I'm looking at the musculature of their back, easy for me to say, and going, how do I want to cut that up? And so that may, change angles and things like that. But overall, the setups are the base of my setups is pretty similar across all three.
What sort of role does storytelling play in your portraiture?
For me personally, it's really important. It's important for me that when somebody is viewing the image, they want to know, they can either tell what emotion is going on. Like the portrait, I keep going backwards. Let's go this way. There we go. So this portrait on my wall, it's a mom and her baby. You know, you can see the story between them. You know, in her gaze at him, it's there. You can just, you feel the vibe. There's other times when I'm working with somebody's expression, what I'm aiming for is that when the viewer experiences that portrait, they want to know more, that they can tell there's something going on behind the eye, the brain's working on something, and they go, what's that story? Or, you know, somebody looks, you know, powerful and confident, and, you know, you can get that sense, you just get the sense that they are commanding, and, you know, and I think that's intriguing to a viewer. And I try to incorporate that in everything that I do, really.
Yeah, and for listeners who've been following the podcast for a while, this is of course something we talk about a lot when it comes to headshots. So you get to tell the story of the person that you're photographing, because ultimately, you know, you'd photograph a CEO of a company in a completely different way, as you would, you know, I don't know, what's a good example? The intern. I'm trying to think of, you know.
But, you know, I don't know that I would actually try to photograph them differently, but what they're going to give me is going to be completely different. You know, because of the, I think back to my internship in the theater, you know, I knew I was an intern, and I was pretty good. At least I thought I was pretty good, but I also knew I wasn't at the level, you know, here. So like I didn't have high level confidence and low level confidence. and I think those things come through in the photos, like whether somebody wants for them to or not. Like there's a subconscious vibe. And so I don't think I try to shoot them differently. I just think how they, back to what I was saying initially, how we're interacting together dictates that bit of story, which is interesting. I hadn't really kind of thought about it that way either, but yeah, you made me think about two things today.
There you go. Well, I always, you know, I come up against that a lot when I do, in particular when I do group shots of, let's say the office team, right? And, you know, I try and pay a lot of attention. Well, no, I do pay a lot of attention to, you know, who's who in the photo. And I always try, you know, I want to make sure that I don't make the boss look like he's the intern and the intern look like he's in charge, because, you know, that can bring with it a whole other bunch of problems, you know, afterwards. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just part of the contract, you know, for me, especially when I do corporate shoots, let's say on location in particular. Actually, they're always on location, you know, so like sometimes it's part of the whole branding package or whatever. And so I always, you know, I try and do that. If it's a group shot, I try and do that, of course, with posing in particular. So I try to make sure that you can sort of identify who's who in the photo, or at least who's in charge, you know, to a degree. That's always the thing. How are there any specific genres or themes in portraiture that you personally find challenging?
Off the top of my head, no. I don't think so. Now, of course, I say that, and I'll wake up, you know, at 4 a.m. and go, "Oh, what I meant was."
Of course, there's that thing, yeah.
And you know, I'll like send you a million text messages. Go put this in the show notes. But no, off the top of my head, no.
I mean, for me, for instance, you know, I do shoot a considerable part of what I do. I shoot on location. I mean, I talked earlier about, you know, I use my own space, you know, in my house as a shooting space. But a lot of the time, you know, I'm paid to be on location to conduct a shoot at some company's premises, for example. and very, I mean, there are situations where, let's put it this way, there are situations that are challenging, predominantly because either there might not be the right space or the space I'm hired to photograph is incredibly boring. Oh my God. I got hired. The first time I got hired to work for a particular construction company. The first thing I thought, like, oh well, that's not really something I do. Okay, and then I thought, but the money's good, so surely I can make this work somehow. And this is a company that built distribution centers, and distribution center warehouses, basically. Warehouses are basically big blue boxes in the countryside, and that's all there's to it. There's not much more to it, and you really have to think very hard about how you can make that shoebox basically look interesting, and so I remember really freaking out about this on the first shoot, and then a little bit later I kind of thought, this is a creative challenge. I like it. And then you come up with all sorts of different, for me, it's always like, it's, I have this thing, this is what I say to, this is one particular client I work with on these projects. And I always say, like, depending on what time of the year it is, it's like, okay, well, sun's up at 4, I'm going to be there at 4 a.m. Make sure they can open the gates, because that's when I'm going to shoot this thing. Because once you've missed sunrise, these buildings just become drab. So if you want to create any drama or anything of interest with these buildings, you need to have the light, and some of these, you can imagine, like, some of these distribution centers are huge. There's no way I can light the exterior of the building really to any effect, So so I mean, for me, that's a majorly challenging situation.
Yeah, and so for me, like, I really don't leave the studio that often, or if I am leaving the studio, it's to go do headshots, and most of my on-location headshot gigs, they want exactly the style of headshot that I do in the studio. So I just pack everything up and take it with me. I hit a point a couple of years ago where I just say no to jobs. If somebody, hey, I want you to come shoot this architecture, and no, pass. It's not my jam. Here's who I know that can knock that out of the park for you. It's not what I do. It's not what I'm interested in. So yeah, I really don't shoot stuff that I don't want to shoot, and I'm a control freak. I like the studio. Like, I'm in control here. Like, I have all the lights and I have my air conditioning, and so I don't do a lot of outside the space to run into those issues. Thankfully, don't want to run into those issues.
I always try and outprice them. So again, this is something I've mentioned on the podcast several times before. But so if you've heard the story before, dear listeners, then just listen to it again, because it's interesting. Anyway, no, it's been, during the pandemic, and it's something I want to talk to you about as well in a minute, of course. But during the pandemic, in the UK, we had really strict lockdowns, and there was the rules, the laws were very draconian. Like, you weren't allowed to leave the house for longer than 45 minutes. You weren't allowed to have people that were not in your, what they call it, family cluster or something. You weren't allowed to have people in your house and all the rest of it. So for me, portrait photography went out the window. Like, headshot photography didn't happen. Because it couldn't. And even outside, people were just way too freaked out. I remember that, it was that time, especially at the beginning, when would have been like maybe April, March 2020, not April, May 2020, when it first started, and everybody was in a major panic about it. That time when, like, you'd go to the superstore and you come around the corner of an aisle, and there'd be another person at the far end of the aisle, and they'll freak out, and you see the fear in their eyes, because there'd be like one other human being, 30 yards away. At that time. Right. And so, I was taking on all sorts of work, right? Indiscriminate, like somebody would call me up and they go like, oh, you know, do you shoot products? But 100%, send it over, no problem. You know, I'll do that. And I had a call one day. This guy, you know, calls me up and he goes, I'm moving house and I want you to shoot my garden. And I said, well, I don't, like, not something I do. Like, you know, I shoot people usually. So and he goes like, yeah, no, I really want you to shoot my garden. And I said, well, have you seen my website? And he goes like, yeah, I've been to your website. Love it. Absolutely love it. It's only got portraits on it, you know. But I really want you to come shoot my garden. And I thought, wow, this is weird. I'm like, okay. So I said like, okay, but I'm going to have to charge you a day rate, you know. And I'm thinking, okay, it's going to be so expensive. He's going to say no. And so he goes like, oh, yeah, absolutely. What's your day rate? So I told him and he goes like, oh, yeah, fine. And I'm like, really?
Yeah, all right.
Okay. And then, you know, of course I thought, and he said like, oh, well, you know, he's moving house and he spent like 5 years or something, you know, cultivating this garden, and he just wanted some good imagery as a memento, basically, you know, to take with him. And so I expected, I don't know what I expected, like a perfectly manicured garden, you know, English, I don't know, lawn, whatever they call it, you know, and but I phoned a friend of mine as I was, and he only lived like 2 blocks away from me. So it's kind of practical. And so I called a friend of mine and I said, like, look, that's my friend Nick. And I said, look, like, you know, this has happened. I'm going to go to this job. If I don't call you in an hour, I'll call the police. Because I don't know what's going to happen here. And anyway, so I get to this house and I look at this house and the garden's a disaster. It's like totally overgrown, crazy. Like, basically, somebody spent 5 years not doing a thing, and that was the garden. And so I immediately thought, whoa, this is very odd. You know, I don't know if I want to get involved in this. Anyway, so I walk in, and there's the guy, and so he explains to me that he is a university lecturer, and he's basically cultivated this garden to be a natural biotope for insects. And so the task was to photograph the garden and to basically capture as many insects as possible, you know, for him, as a memento, right? For all the work that he's put in. And so in the initial craziness and total randomness and chaos of this garden, turns out this was actually a very deeply thought through project, right? So he's basically created this space for as many species of insects to live as possible, including like little ponds and all the rest of it. And, you know, at first I thought like, well, I've never shot insects before. How, like, where do I find these insects? But then as I walked in, I realized they're everywhere. So it wasn't actually difficult at all. So it turned out to be quite a fun shoot with some really interesting results. Like I said, I'm not an insect photographer at the slightest. But I actually spent a good deal of time there, and it was really enjoyable. And it was a great day as well. So actually I came out with some really great photographs of a gig that I nearly declined. You know? But he agreed to a day rate, so I got paid very well. So yeah, I'm not complaining.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
No. So yeah, how did you survive the pandemic? What was of impact did it have on you in Kentucky?
So we completely shut down. You know, and I oddly, like, I hit a really zen point with it, like, really early. It was just like, I mean, this is happening. I can't do anything about it, so whatever. Luckily, here in Kentucky, they did offer unemployment to, you know, us self-employed folks. So I was able to draw unemployment checks. And I had a project that I had started pre-pandemic. It was a series of 4 Vanitas images that I created that I was doing a really deep dive edit on. So I was able to just kind of work on that project and just enjoy that process of working on those 4 pieces. And then right around the time I was finishing up with those, they're like, okay, y'all can go back to work. great. Now, getting people to book immediately. Actually, that's not true. I had a client the first day we were back. Now that I think about it, and we were still at a place where nobody still wanted to be like close, or I didn't want to be close with anybody. And so this guy comes in and he didn't know how to tie a tie. And so he's like, "Can you tie my tie?" And I was like, "Absolutely not. Nope." So I ended up talking him through how to do it. But yeah, and once I was back, it was back. And a lot of my guy clients don't know how to tie ties, which is fascinating. I do a lot of these. So, but no,
yeah,
so pandemic actually wasn't bad for me.
Yeah, you're definitely a lot more stylish. I remember I had a job for about maybe 13 or 14 years ago. I started a job that required some shirt and tie, and in the British school system, where kids wear school uniforms, they learn how to tie a tie very early on. But I've never been in the British school system since I'm not from around here, so I didn't know that. And so there were 2 YouTube videos that I used to watch every morning. One with a standard knot, and the other one was like a double Windsor or something. So depending on what tie I was wearing that day. And I literally had to, because also my brain doesn't work like that. I can't remember things like that. So every morning I had to basically get up, get dressed, watch that YouTube video, follow the instructions, and then show up in the office pretending I knew what I was doing.
I did it was a couple of years ago. I did an on-location headshot appointment for a bank. And like the 9th or 10th guy that came into the little shooting space that we had, I noticed that all the guys had the exact same knot on their tie. They were exact. And so I stopped the guy. I was like, "Is there a mom out there doing all of your ties?" And he's like, "Yeah, no good." And it was like, that's fascinating to me. So no, I learned how to tie one very, very young. And I have no problem wearing them. I know there's a lot of guys out there go, "Oh, I can't wear a tie, it'll choke you." Like, no, it's adjustable. It won't choke you at all. If it's choking you, your shirt's too small. So I digress.
Yeah, also something I've learned. I absolutely agree. That's something I had to learn the hard way. What's your how do you stay inspired as a portrait photographer?
I go through phases where I'll go through a big phase where I'm just shooting and creating all the time and having a great time doing it, and then I'll get into a phase where I just get burned out and anything that I create, whether it's client work, whether it's trying to do a personal piece, I rip it apart. We're like, I hate everything. So I guess I'm kind of manic in that way, and I just kind of have to go through my cycles. I'm sure people would say I should see a therapist about that. I also try to do some personal projects in the year. So like the Vanitas portrait project that I did was just to feed my artistic soul. I did Persephone series a couple of years ago now. That was just me to push. I'm working on one now. That's the Three Graces, and that was just literally I've got to do something to feed my artist soul.
Ben, thank you so much for being our guest on the podcast this week. It's an absolute pleasure and an education. Okay, folks, that's it for today. It was an awesome blast having Ben on the show. And as always, before we go, let me just recommend another episode that I think you'll like. Check out episode 139 with Rafael Weigel, Calgary's very own headshot legend. I'm sure you'll love it. If you enjoy our content, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake to help us continue creating and bringing you more exciting episodes. It really does mean the world to us. And for those of you who are listening on the audio version of this podcast, or to the audio version of this podcast, did you know that there's a fully fledged video version over on YouTube with plenty of examples of our guest photography in full Technicolor? All you have to do is go over to YouTube, search for Camera Shake Podcast, and you'll be able to watch all past episodes on there. And if you're already on YouTube, then, well, drop us a comment, hit the like button, ring that bell, and share with your friends. Your engagement helps us reach a wider audience all over the world.